And it's 12 p.m.
Oh, wow. Okay, should we get going then?
Please.
Okay, hi everyone. Oh, is that me or you guys? Let me just turn that off. There we go. Okay, hi everyone. Great to see everyone. I can see the numbers are counting in the background. We've got 112 people now joined us from across the province, so really great for you to join us. My name is Robin Wark. I'm from BC Hydro, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Energy Sector Council. And this is kicking off one of 3 webinars that we've got planned in June and July, lunchtime webinars. So they'll be on Tuesdays from 12 till 1. And these webinars are part of a larger communications program that the Energy Step Code Council has been putting together. So the Energy Step Code, as you guys know, came as a result of some really in-depth dialogue and advice from a multi-stakeholder group, including the building industry, local governments, the provincial government, professional association, utilities, etc. So that group came together over the course of a couple of years and to work out how we could transform the market to get to near net zero buildings as the base building code by 2030 or 2032, which is both the federal and the provincial policy now that we have in place. So that group came together, and we now have a regulation that was put forward in April, and it's pretty black and white. It's on the province of BC's website. It's black and white and pretty dry, to be honest. And our challenge is to how to communicate to you the nuances behind that regulation. So, why was it framed up how it was? What concerns do different stakeholders have around the table around what good rollout or poor rollout would look like? And how can you engage with the Energy Sector Code Council and your different associations going forward? We see this as a partnership implementation. So the regulation was put in place, and then the group that put the regulation in place said, you know what, we want to be there to be able to support implementation. So the purpose of this webinar series is part of that is to share with you what that partnership and that support looks like going forward. So this webinar series, as I say, is just part of a larger communications plan that's going to be including presentations and workshop, professional association events. Maybe you've attended some of these already. Some local government events, articles in trade magazines, and detailed training that we've got planned with the builder community at different forums and events. So these webinars are just part of a much larger effort. The key audience for this webinar or this webinar series, and we know we've got lots of different folks who are around the table, but our key audience for this is really local governments. So maybe you're a community energy manager in a large local government that already has energy efficiency policies in place, and you're just wondering what does transition over to Step Code look like? Or maybe you're a co-op student in Dawson Creek, and you've been handed this file by your boss who said, right, now what should we do around the Energy Step Code? And this is the first time that you've looked at it. The purpose of this webinar series is to provide you with more accessible information than on that website around what was the thinking that went on behind that regulation, what are the nuances of successful rollout of the Energy Step Code and that transformation to near net zero by 2032, and what updates and materials can you be expecting going forward. So the webinar series doesn't go into the details of Step Code 101. If you're interested in that, we already have a webinar that was put together back in February. We had Zachary May, who's the chair of the Energy Step Code Council, and is from the Building Safety Standards branch, Jeff Fisher from the Urban Development Institute, and Megan Lohman from the Regional District of East Kootenay. They put together a bit of a 101 webinar on what is the Energy Step Code. So if you're interested in that level, please go and have a look at that. That webinar is available on the Building Safety Standards branch website. So let's go on to the next slide, Bertine, if you will. So let's talk about the webinar series that we've got this summer. So there's 3 that we've got lined up. The first one is today is, are we good to go? How government and industries are getting ready for the Energy Step Code. And so as we mentioned, the council has been in place for 2 years and has been working with the various groups that they work with. And so it gives a bit of an update on where we currently are. if you attended that webinar back in February, we asked you to, if you're a local government person, to be able to respond to a survey around what you think the major concerns and interests from your local governments will be around the Energy Set Code. And so we're going to be kicking off the webinar today with a presentation on that, and then we'll go into some of the detailed industry analysis that has been in place as well. So that's today. And then next week, we have a sneak peek inside the, a sneak peek inside the Local Government Best Practices Guide. So this is a document that's been put together that basically tries to distill everything from the Energy Set Code Council into guidance for local government around what good rollout looks like. And we hope to get that guide out by now, but we had a very ambitious timeline, and it looks like we'll probably get it out in early July to you guys. It's currently being desktop published now as we speak. So that Local Government Best Practices Guide will give you like kind of the guts about what we think good implementation looks like. And we'll have Zach May from the province talking about those best practices. And then we'll have 2 local government representatives who've worked on energy policy and implementing it share with you their lessons. So we have Emily Adden from the City of North Vancouver and also the Planning Institute of BC rep on the Energy Set Code Council. And then Andy Christie, who's the Chief Building Official for the City of Kimberley, so a much smaller community. And they'll be able to share with you how they found implementation of energy policy and some of the tricks that they learned. And then we'll have a lot of time for discussion around what good implementation might look like for the Energy Set Code. And then finally, on July 11th, we'll be having the study that everyone's been waiting for, and that's the costing study. So Dave Ramsey from Integral Group will take us through those key findings of the costing study, which was, I think, one of the largest costing studies that has been ever done in Canada around energy codes. And so he'll be able to share like the different building types, the different steps, what do those costs and benefits look like. So that will be in July 11th, and then that report will be coming out subsequently. So that gives you a bit of a sense of the overall webinar series. Let's talk about today. So next slide, Bertine. Yeah, so our title today is Are We Good to Go? How governments and industry are getting ready for the Energy Step Code. And as I mentioned, we'll start off with looking at local government survey. It was administered by the Community Energy Association, and then we pulled in BC Housing Research Division, and we have Lee Grenius here from BC Housing to go through some of those results. And our intent is to make this an annual survey, so we'll be able to share with you how things change. Because remember, this survey was taken in February, how local governments implementing the Energy Step Code. We'll roll this out again next February and report back to you. The second presentation is from Helen Goodland from Brantwood Consulting, and she'll be reporting out on a major training capacity gap analysis study that was done with Brantwood and Modus Consulting here in Vancouver. And they basically went through what are the training needs that we have around the Energy Step Code for all the different groups and what training's out there, and she'll be able to provide some findings on that. And then I'll be turning it over to Dr. Tom Burkhout from Ministry of Energy and Mines, the province of BC, who's the co-chair of the Energy Step Code Training and Communication Subcommittee. And he'll be giving a bit of an update on what that subcommittee is doing around capacity and training, how we're looking to build capacity to enable that, both that net zero by 2032, and then those first couple of years, like what do we need to be doing to start to transition industry and local governments to this new way of doing business. So that's a bit of an overview of today, and hopefully we'll have 20 minutes of questions available for you guys to be able to ask. If you've got questions, there's a little chat panel on the right-hand side. Please type in your questions and they'll get sent to me. And at the end of everyone's presentations, I'll go through these questions and fire them out. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Lee to talk about the local government survey. Thanks, guys.
Great, thank you, Robin. I'll just bring up my presentation here. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Lee Grenis. I'm a research analyst at BC Housing, and as Robin mentioned, today I'm going to talk about the results of the Local Government Awareness and Readiness Survey that was sent in February of this year. And it was a collaboration between BC Hydro, BC Housing, and the Community Energy Association, and BC Housing assisted with analyzing the survey. So this is my agenda for the presentation. I'll go over survey objectives and participation stats, take a look at the key findings, and then some of the conclusions that we drew from this survey. The general survey objectives were to gain a better understanding of the current awareness of the BC Energy Step Code amongst local governments and their level of interest in adoption. We wanted also to identify the perceived barriers to adoption and resources that might help lower those barriers. So, general survey statistics, we did have 95 respondents to this survey, and they were local government staff in a variety of positions within each organization. We had staff from the planning department, staff who are sustainability professionals, as well as building officials and senior management respond. So altogether, these 95 respondents represented 69 communities across BC that in turn house roughly 70% of the BC population. So we think it's pretty good spread, pretty good representation. To give an idea of the type of communities and where they're located, 43% were small communities, so that's communities with populations under 20,000. Around 60% were located in the Lower Mainland Southwest and Vancouver Island and Coast regions, and 50% of the respondents were building officials. Getting into the key findings, so one area we wanted to learn more about was the current experience with energy efficient buildings in these communities. So we did find that local government staff were quite familiar with existing green building rating systems such as Passive House, Energy Star, and R2000. But when it came to working with certified energy advisors, the community may be a little less familiar. You can see in this chart 14 local governments reported that 0% of their builders were currently working with certified energy advisors. And in 23 communities, it was thought that between 1 to 10% of builders are currently working with certified energy advisors. In the remaining communities, it was a mix. It ranged from between 10% of builders and 50% of builders. I'm sorry.
Hello, everyone. We're just trying to reconnect with Lee. There seems to have been a connection issue, so just bear with us for 1 second. Thank you.
Yeah, hi guys. Sorry about that. I'm just wondering whether we should move on to Helen's presentation. Or Bertine, do you have a sense of when Lee might come back on?
She should be coming back any second, but if we want to continue with this webinar, I would say let's move on to the next presentation and bring Lee back in after.
Okay, perfect. Let's do that. Helen, are you good to go? Okay, so Bertine, let's link Helen in, and maybe we can get some insights into the study that Helen undertook.
So thank you very much. Am I ready to go?
Yes, you are. Just share your screen, please.
Actually, we have Lee back online now. Bertine, should we go for Lee or should we go for Helen? What's your preference?
Lee, are you ready to continue with your presentation? Okay, we can't hear Lee.
Okay. Hey, let's go to Helen, and we'll come back into Lee as well then. Guys, we apologize for the technical difficulties we have here, but hopefully Helen can make it up with some entertaining presentation there. Helen, how are you doing?
Well, I'm here. It's now, the system has frozen.
All right. Widespread technical issues here. Okay, let's see whether we can get Lee back. Lee, can you communicate with us? Okay, hearing none from Lee. Helen is yours.
No, it's I have to log out. Mine is frozen as well.
Okay, so all the attendees, please just stay tuned. We'll let our speakers reload for those who are experiencing a frozen screen. And we'll reconnect shortly.
Actually, guys, while I'm on, and we've got a bit of a break, maybe I'll just tell you about, we have a Twitter plug here from our comms guy, if people can hear. And he says, if participants want to share anything about the webinar, maybe not the technical difficulties, with their Twitter followers, please do so using the hashtag NGStepCode so we can all see it. And the good news is we have 198 people who are registered on this webinar, so thanks everyone for joining us. And again, we really apologize for those technical difficulties. Feel free to write in any questions, as say on that chat box, and we will respond to it maybe as we're waiting for our technical difficulties to get sorted out. Or any advice on how to use webinars without, oh, here we go, we've got Helen back.
Yes, so I'm back with my system. I just need to see if I can share my screen, and then I will go.
Great. So guys, Helen just sent me her bio, and she said she had 30 years of experience in this field. I can't believe it. Can you believe it?
I'm ready. Let's see.
You're getting old, Helen. You go for it.
I am. Can you see this? Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's looking great.
Okay, so I'm going to go. So my piece is to present just the findings of a very substantial training capacity assessment that I conducted in partnership with the Modus planning team. So really what our job was to establish the training needs for both Part 3 and Part 9 buildings and look at what inventory, essentially develop an inventory of the existing training programs that are out there. What we needed to do is to really understand the implementation capacity of industry and government so that communities would be able to gauge how far and how fast they might be able to bring in their levels, their desired levels of step code. And our priority really was looking at the lower levels of the code to start with. We wanted to make sure that we understood any gaps, and based on the gaps and opportunities, to develop a training strategy to fill the gaps and scale up. So as Robin said at the outset, our job essentially was to look at what would it take to implement the step code in terms of training and education, where are we now, and how far do we need to go? And we looked at both Part 3 and Part 9 buildings. So in a nutshell, it's an opportune time for industry-wide training. There is interest in the market. People are busy, and there's pressures on the industry to modernize. And I think that, although that's outside of the scope of this document, I think we're all aware of the technology advances. There are codes and regulations that are advancing not just in BC, but across the country and around the world. There's other issues such as demographic shifts and so forth. So BC is well served by high-performance building experts. We are good at going green. We've been the first at implementing programs like LEED and Passive House. And as a result, we have a very strong foundation of training in the industry. So we have 28 training leaders, both public and private. So that includes colleges as well as private trainers. And the curriculum for the lower tiers, based on our research, we are confident in saying that that exists already. The training is, however, concentrated in the Lower Mainland and the southern Vancouver Island, really urban centers. However, there are delivery agents who are active in all regions, so between 70 to 66 trainers per region, and there are a good number of them who are highly mobile and will go to regional locations to offer training and education for builders and other members of the industry. However, there is a lack of a central platform for ongoing industry training. So there's no one place where you can go and find out all that's going on. It's somewhat dispersed across a number of different providers and sort of repositories of this information. And as a result, there is some duplication, there is some inefficiencies, and there is a potentially significant opportunity to streamline that into a more centralized location. It's clear that the lower steps are really the foundation or the precursors to developing upper step competency. So we took the position that if we have the lower step training capacity in place, that would then be the springboard for the upper steps, although we did look at what's available for upper step competencies as well. So moving to Part 3 buildings first, so looking at the lower steps, just 1 and 2, we looked at what it takes to achieve those steps. And obviously, 3 lines in a PowerPoint do not summarize the extent of the technical requirements. But essentially what it boils down to is that energy modelers are required to create an energy model. Building envelope consultants are required to conduct an air tightness test. And building inspectors are required to be able to inspect the high performance building project. So where are we now? For energy modeling, essentially we have roughly 50 active energy modelers in BC, and that is for Part 3 buildings. In order to assess our capacity, what we assumed was, based on interviews with industry members, we conservatively estimated that approximately 24 buildings would be modeled by each modeler per year, and that works out to be 2 buildings a month. So our model looks at, well, how much capacity do we have? Well, we're amply supplied with energy modelers, and that is not expecting them to work very hard or fast at this stage. And obviously there are efficiencies that would be developed in all of these situations based on regulations coming into effect. We did get a sense that there was very much a chicken and egg situation when it comes to training. Regulations need to be there to give confidence, and then they will go and train. So you'll see that we're at 176%, but essentially that's enough to give us comfort that there is sufficient folks out there to service the market. And this will be the sort of model that you will see going forward for all of the key stakeholders. So for air tightness testing, similarly, we took some numbers that we generated from interviews and research with industry. A number of reports also look at what we have in the way of capacity for building scientists and engineers and architects that specialize in this area, and our industry capacity here, again, is sufficient to meet the needs of the lower step codes. More details are obviously in the report. So how far do we need to go for Part 3 buildings? Well, essentially the key capacity gaps are around quality control and accessibility for both modeling and testing. The trades do need to build more information and capabilities around products and materials and using proper specifications and detailing. And then, of course, we want to make sure that building officials have the experience and expertise to be able to deal with situations such as products that don't have CSA approval, that are new details and products that they need to become familiar with. So moving to Part 9 buildings, again, looking at the lower steps, so 1, 2, and 3, the key stakeholders here are energy advisors, Part 9 builders, home builders and their trades, and the building inspection and building regulation community as well. So energy advising, so we have 64 energy advisors in BC. It's a sort of a moving number at this point as folks enter and leave the market, but we do feel that there's also latent capacity of folks who have been involved in energy advising in the past when we've had government programs in effect, and that they are available to move back into the, some at least will be able to move back into the market based on confidence that work would be available for them. So again, we've made some assumptions based on talking to experienced energy advising firms in the province, and created a model that looks at what sort of capacity we have. Now we know that this is a somewhat moving target, and more work has been done by BC Housing and the province since we commissioned this report was commissioned. But we reckon that you know, essentially at least half of the program, half of the communities in the province have some form of energy efficiency program, and that there are energy advisors who are highly mobile, and even though they may not be serving a substantial market segment right now, the demand is they are able to meet demand, even though that demand may be largely unknown in remote locations. So I think this is where I would refer you back to Lee's presentation from BC Housing, who's been looking a little bit in more detail at this area. So finally, we looked at home builders, and we have a very large number of licensed home builders, of whom 80% actually do build at least one house in a year, and we have 200 of them who have already made some investment in education and energy efficiency programs. So we looked at what the capacity was for training. We reckon that with the existing program providers, we can gain access to about 200 builders a year. And so our model really shows that it would probably take 1 to possibly 3 years, depending on the capacity of or the interest of the industry to gain access to that training. But certainly the leaders would be amply served right from the outset. So we would be able to get within the end of next year, for example, 2/3 to 3/4 of the active builder market in front of some form of training, so that would at least help with the progressive municipalities or those who want to move ahead more quickly than others.
So Helen, we're going to have to wrap it up here, if that's okay.
Sure. I'll stop right there.
Okay, good stuff. Lee, are you ready to take over again where you left behind?
Yes, I am.
That's great. So thanks, Helen, for the overview of that study. And just for everyone's information, we're still dotting the I's and crossing the T's on that study. So it's not quite available yet, but we will make it available once that has occurred. But here's a report that will be available straight away. So Lee, I'll let you carry on. And again, if you can, with the restricted time, if you could just probably hit some of the highlights, that would be great. Thank you.
Great, sure. Thanks, Robin, and thanks everyone for your patience with me disappearing. I'm back now. I'm just going to pick up where I left off, but I will move quickly through the rest of the presentation. So we talked about the certified energy advisors. We also want to know what communities are currently doing with energy efficient buildings and what policy tools are being used to encourage and require energy efficient buildings. We found that quite a few local governments are currently encouraging energy efficiency, 28 unique governments in total of the 69. The most common tools that they are using are rezoning policy or rezoning consideration, and that holds true for both Part 9 and Part 3. Also, a condition related to density was often used, or an energy audit, rebate, or subsidy. And for Part 3, we also saw tax exemption or reduction being used to encourage that energy efficiency. When it came to knowledge of the BC Energy Step Code itself, it varied by region. We found that almost half of survey respondents rated their local government as having moderate knowledge of the Step Code. 40% thought their government had poor or no knowledge, and around 15% thought their local government had good or excellent knowledge. We can see in the graph here that Vancouver Island and Coast, Lower Mainland Southwest, and North Coast and Nechako regions are the regions where respondents were most likely to indicate their local government had moderate to excellent knowledge. On the other hand, we see Northeast and Cariboo regions are areas where training might be required. When we asked about interest in adopting the BC Energy Step Code in the next 1 to 2 years, in total, 41 unique local governments of the 69 indicated they had medium or high interest in incentivizing or requiring builders and developers to adopt the BC Energy Step Code. This is pretty significant. It's higher than the number of local governments that currently use tools to encourage energy efficiency. And yeah, when it came to the steps themselves and which step respondents thought their local government would choose, there's a significant amount of uncertainty. We found the majority selected don't know or left this question blank. 28 local governments were ready to say which step they thought their local government would adopt for Part 9 and Part 3 buildings. For Part 9, the most often selected steps were steps 1, 2, and 3. It was pretty consistent. And for Part 3, steps 2 and 3 were most often selected. And survey respondents who selected a step often selected multiple steps, probably thinking of different policy tools they would use with different steps. When we asked survey respondents which policy tools they thought their local governments might use to encourage, incentivize, or require adoption of Step Code, the most often selected tool was to make it mandatory for all new buildings, so that could include a certain type of new building or in a defined area. That was followed by energy audit rebate or subsidy, or a permit fee rebate. We also asked about the barriers to adoption of the BC Energy Step Code for local government, for the building community, and for the real estate community. So just bear in mind this was local government staff who answered this question. In the survey, we didn't reach out directly to the building community or real estate community. So these are perceived barriers. For local government, the most often selected barrier was a lack of capacity to implement and enforce, followed by uncertainty around how they would implement and ensure compliance, and concerns around lack of information and training. For the building community, it was thought that additional construction costs might prove to be a barrier. And the real estate community, there was concern that the affordability of new buildings and how that might be impacted by the BC Energy Step Code could be a barrier. So just to conclude, these are the key takeaways that we took from this survey. 28 local governments are currently using tools to increase energy efficiency of buildings of the 69 who responded to the survey, and all 28 are interested in adopting the BC Energy Step Code. 41 unique communities indicated medium or high interest in incentivizing or requiring. That's 13 more than are currently using tools to encourage or require energy efficiency. Most local governments are not yet sure which step they will adopt. There's still a significant amount of uncertainty around that. And knowledge of the BC Energy Step Code was positively correlated with interest in adopting in communities. And close to 90% of participants in the survey reported that staff training on the BC Energy Step Code would increase their community's interest in adopting. So training is a key piece here. So thank you very much.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Lee. And we'll turn it over to Tom. And while Tom's getting ready, a couple of questions we've had in about what's the difference between Part 9 and Part 3 buildings. So Part 9, yes, so it's a big number, but it's the small buildings. It's your single family, your townhouses, and your low apartment buildings. It also includes commercial, but we don't have step code targets for commercial. And then Part 3, small number, big buildings. So yeah, your multi-unit residential buildings, your high-rises, that type of thing, or your large institutional. So that was one question. And another one is, can we make these PowerPoints available to you? Absolutely. We'll be sending you an email following this with both the web link to the webinar that we had in the first one in February, and then all these PowerPoint decks. So Tom, over to you.
Thank you. All right, and I'll try to keep it brief so we have lots of time for questions still. So I am a Senior Policy Advisor with the Energy Efficiency Branch, which is in the Ministry of Energy and Mines. And for the last couple of years, we've been supporting the Building Safety Standards Branch, which has been leading the STEP code work. And so one of the ways we're supporting them is I'm co-chair of the Energy Step Code Communications and Training Committee, along with Brendan McEwen from the City of Richmond. So my presentation today, there's four things that I'd like to talk about with you. One is just to introduce very quickly the Energy Step Code Communication and Training Committee. Talk about the recommendations that came out of the Modus study and the BC Housing study that was done for local governments or with local governments, their survey. Discuss what actions are already being taken and how these link up to some of the recommendations that were put forward. Identify what recommendations are still outstanding, or at least touch on some of them. And then finally, just a few wrap-up thoughts. Before we get rolling, this slide is just to remind people of how complicated the space is that we're working in when it comes to buildings, and even more so with efficient buildings, and all the different players and skill sets and technologies that are involved with achieving the kinds of outcomes that we want to see. And when we took the Energy Step Code, the Communications and Training Committee, this is the kind of lens that we're applying to training. So it's a very broad lens. And then recognizing that there's lots of players already in those spaces doing training and working on capacity, and it's trying to understand our role is more what's happening and where are there gaps, and how can we work with those existing players to address where there's still needs. So the Energy Step Code Council, Robin talked about this a little bit at the beginning. So basically, the Step Code itself, it's the province is the regulatory authority with the Energy Step Code, and the council was established to support the successful implementation of the Energy Step Code. And it's comprised of associations from a lot of the key organizations, such as builders and developers, trades and professionals, utilities, NGOs, local governments, and then with the provincial government, there's 3 different branches of government that have been participating. And underneath the council, there's 4 committees, of which one is the communities and the Communications and Training Committee. And we're tasked with overseeing the development and implementation of communications and training plans around the Energy Step Code. And members on that committee, they include all levels of government, so federal, provincial, local. BC Housing is there. We have utilities, as well as Community Energy Association has a representative. And I'm going to go to the studies and look at some of the recommendations that came out of them, and then the actions that have been taken, and then where there's still some gaps. Again, won't address all of where the gaps or all the work is currently being done, but just in some of the highlights. So the Modus study, and Helen, I apologize, I should call this the Modus and Brentwood study, but I just have Modus study here. And that was looking largely at industry capacity. And out of there were 3 sets of recommendations that came. One was around general recommendations, so more providing the foundations for both large and small buildings, residential, commercial, institutional. And then looking specifically at the part 3 or large buildings, and then part 9 more the smaller and residential buildings, small residential. And in total, there are 27 recommendations for us to kind of take in and digest. And I'll touch on some of those here. So with part 3, so these are your large buildings, and as Helen was saying, one of the outcome findings from that is, for the most part, the industry is in pretty good shape for delivering, particularly on the lower steps of the step code, and in some cases, in some areas of the province, already in strong and good shape for delivering on the higher steps as well. But we need to ensure that we're all walking before we run. And one of the biggest, takeaways from this was the need for greater consistency for part 3 buildings in that sector, particularly around air tightness testing, as well as improving the consistency of energy modeling. And on the air tightness side, there's a number of guides that are already produced or will be published very shortly. The thermal bridging guide, which was first published in 2014 and updated in 2016. And then BC Housing has an Achieving Airtight Buildings Guide, which I think isn't out yet, but will be out shortly. As well as they're working on an animated instructional video for building and testing. And for energy modeling for large buildings, APEG BC and AI BC are developing energy modeling guidelines. And they're expected to be published in January 2018, and that'll address looking at roles and responsibilities, standards of care and practice, as well as quality assurance processes. So where are there, touching on some of the gaps that I feel like are still outstanding that we saw from the Modus report, and that the training committee continues to look at and to try to understand, okay, how can we address these gaps going forward? With part 3, it's generally in a good position, but there are some areas. One is the expansion of training and that question of scaling up. So as the Energy Step Code, as we move forward in time, and one can expect a greater take-up, is to ensure that we have, even if we have existing capacity now, is to ensure that we can maintain that over time. And then also another important one here is number 4, I just want to point out, is just around installation of equipment, and in particularly in this case, window installation for part 3 buildings. Looking at part 9, so these are smaller buildings, largely residential, but some small commercial as well. The key focus here was really around builders and trades, and the need to continue to work with those sectors to ensure that they have the knowledge of the building systems and looking at installations. And again, I think in BC we're in a pretty good shape initially, given there's already a number of certification building programs out there that have been working for some time now in high performance homes. But again, we will just need to ensure that we spread that net wide as far as training and capacity goes. There are, again, some resources already available or will be published shortly. An important one is the Illustrated Builder Guide to Meeting Energy Step Codes, and this is being worked on right now by BC Housing. And it's going to be published, the first iteration of it will be published in September. Now they'll be looking at steps 1 and 2, and then there'll be 2 subsequent updates to it in January 2018 for steps 3 and 4, and then as well in May 2018 for steps 5. And then another set of guides as well, one being a guide on cost-effective pathways for high-performance homes and buildings. And there's going to be 2, there will be a guide itself, which will be more directed at the building sector, but then also a consumer bulletin, which will help to inform consumers as well about that. And then specific training. So again, BC Housing has a number of trainings that will be starting to roll out in the fall, looking specifically at Part 9 residential buildings across all the 4 climate zones in BC, about 8 of them in total, and there will also be some recorded webinars. And then you can just see at the bottom the schedule of when they'll be rolling those out for the different steps of the step code. And of course, as Helen mentioned, there's private trainers as well that are out there, and some are already providing training specific to the energy step code for the building sector. And then there's the building certification programs such as Energy Star for new homes, and the Canadian Home Builders Association has training as well as Passive House. And of course colleges, and that's looking at the lower tiers. As we go to the higher tiers, there is again BC Housing in their final round of training that they're doing in the fall 2018 is going to be looking at the higher steps. There's Passive House there, which provides training. There's the Canadian Home Builders Association Net Zero Energy Ready building certification training, as well as colleges such as BCIT and their high performance training lab. But we're going to get, we've got a good start, but again, there's still work to be done, and we recognize that. So some key things that we need to be thinking about is more on-site training, and how do we get more on-site training? So going to where we're getting out of the classroom, getting to the sites where buildings are actually being built, and then also looking at mechanical and window installations, and ensuring that we have consistent quality that's required for these as we get higher in efficiency with building requirements.
Tom, maybe 1 more minute, if that's okay.
All right. Well, what I might do is I'm going to just skip to local government. So this set of recommendations here, it's more around kind of the general foundational pieces for the building sector, but then I just want to jump quick to local governments. So this is, I think, primarily local government audience here. These are some of the factors for success that come out of the BC Housing Study for both Part 3 and Part 9 buildings. So we look at training, education, information gaps, addressing those, and also implementation support. On this slide, it's some of the resources that are already in place for or being developed for local governments. We have webinars, the Local Government Best Practices Guide, a website, provincial website, which is continues to add more resources to it, and some discussion of a standalone website as well, plus building official training. And there's going to be, in a couple days' time, there's going to be a training recorded that will then be shared and made available in July 2017 for building officials. And with that, I think the key takeaway kind of message is, so this is a web of skills and expertise and technologies that are required to make this work. And the training committee, the communications training committee, we're trying to take that perspective to it. We've got a strong start. There's still lots of work to do. The key next step for us is to develop is to continue to work on our action plan, so which both identifies what's currently in the market, but also where the gaps are, and then starting to work with other partners on how we can address those gaps moving forward. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Good stuff, guys. Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone who's been sending in the questions fast and furious here. Let me start sending them out to people. So Lee, first question to you. People are interested in which local governments responded to the survey, and if there's an opportunity to see like a map of that. Is that included in the report that we'll be sending out to all participants following this webinar?
There is a map. It just shows the regions that we did the analysis on. It doesn't actually name the local governments themselves. I think we were thinking the privacy of the respondents. So while it doesn't say identify local governments by name, it will show the regions and how many local governments in each region.
Great, thank you. Here's one for you, Tom. Has the province mandated step 1 yet? And if not, what is the timeline for mandating that?
They have not, and there's no timeline. Those are the quick and honest answers. And anytime I've asked those questions of my colleagues at BSSB, and that's the exact answer that I'm given. So at this point in time, there is no plan in place to mandate that.
Okay, so we just have that 2032 timeline out there, but not what the interim steps are in between. Yep. Okay. Here's one for you, Helen. So how many of the modelers, of the 50 modelers, and maybe the question works for energy advisors as well, how many of them are outside the Lower Mainland?
Oh,
you're muted. For those who can read lips, this is an excellent response.
Thank you.
Here I am. Here we go.
So it gave me time to think. That's good. The energy modeling for part 3 are primarily in larger firms that are located in urban centers. So yes, the majority of them are located in Victoria, Vancouver, Kelowna. There's some in Prince George, though they are highly mobile. Like any part 3 type consultant, they will travel, and we didn't get the sense that the location of the project was an impediment to their participation in it. When it comes to the energy advisors for Part 9 for homes, again, talking to the main providers, there was a sense that while they're well supplied in, again, the urban centers, those that are servicing more remote and rural locations, the demand is still largely unknown. And so until the demand is known, the capacity for them to reach those locations is also unknown. But again, the sense we got from some of those firms is that they are willing to travel, and that while transportation costs and travel costs may be more for those out-of-the-way folks, that's the case for all of their consultants and builders. So it would be a premium that you would apply just as you would for other consultants and participants in a project.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question for you, Tom. Is there a central resource, for example, a Step Code Council webpage, where the current and planned step implementation are going to be summarized for each municipality?
Well, right now, there's the provincial government standard issue website where information is being posted. As you will learn, so in the next week's seminar in the Best Practices Guide, you'll see there the steps that are being strongly encouraged by the Council for Local Governments to follow as they're moving forward with both assessing different step code levels for their community and then moving forward with implementation. And so as that information comes online, I believe, Robin, maybe you can help me here. At least with the council, that information would be shared, and I'm not sure is the plan then to share that more broadly as local governments move forward.
Yeah, so I guess I can just tell everyone that we do have a web page that's we're hoping to be launched by now, but we're still going through a few of the T crossing and I dotting. But yeah, the idea is there'll be a central resource that will have all this information that you can just go to and click on. There also is an interest, certainly from industry players like energy advisors and builders, to know exactly what type of steps that municipalities have said they're going to, like either in bylaw or actually are going out to public consultation in. So we will be working to see how we can share that information out with industry. So we won't be getting ahead of where local governments are doing their public consultation, but where you've already got public consultation happening, be able to make people aware and up to speed on that, so that they can say, yeah, well, we need to crank up our number of energy advisors in this area because this is what they're thinking about.
Yeah, and I think that's the one thing we just need to work out at what point we can share what information, like as it comes in. And so being sensitive to, local governments and their own internal processes and not jumping the gun there. So that's something that, but I think the intention is to get that shared with industry and others as, as early as possible, given that that's information that you'll need as well.
Cool. Here's a question for you, Helen. What's the different definition of a delivery agent?
Training delivery agents. So these are folks who offer training that has some form of either credential attached to it. So if you're a college or a private trainer that offers a homeowner protection office credits, or have AIBC learning credit units, those types of things. So yeah, there's a wide range of training out there depending on who is offering what, but essentially that would be our minimum standard, is that it's accepted by industry.
Cool, that's great. Tom, a question again for you. With current environment of local governments varying their approach to code enforcement, is there going to be a central body that governs the rules on how they're going to be interpreted, how step codes are going to be interpreted?
How step central? Well, I would say I don't know about that. BSS, so the Building Safety Standards branch. So enforcement's done at the local government level. And that would be a question BSSB would have to, I'm not aware of any plan for that at this point, but that would be the Building Safety Standards branch, you know, if that sort of thing were to go forward, but not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Unless anyone's heard differently. But
there is going to be a technical working group that's going to be looking at technical aspects, so that's perhaps something that that those guys can do. A question, and again, this is for anyone if they want to. As a manufacturer who deals with builders and various contractors, where do we send these customers for more information? Tom, do you want to take that one? So again, this is somebody from. Again, we welcome everyone to this webinar, but this is a question from a manufacturer who deals with builders and contractors. Where should customers get more information?
Well, I think a good place to start are the guides that BC Housing is going to be developing. So the illustrated guide, builders guides, is a very good place to start. I think, you know, talking to energy advisors and modelers, they're the ones, in a lot of cases, they're going to be on the front lines in terms of looking at what the different options are. I think as we go forward, we're going to get a better sense of what combinations of you know, equipment works or windows or whatnot work in different homes or buildings. And so I think there is going to be more and better information being developed as we go forward. But at least initially, I would start with the, like there's the cost optimization work that's being done right now. And when that gets published, there's going to be a lot of good information in there to understand like at what different tiers, what components are the ones that seem to be the ones that work best at different tiers from a cost perspective at least, as well as the energy performance perspective. But then also the BC Housing Illustrated guides, there'll be some good information in there as well.
And if I could add that the industry associations are getting to grips with this pretty quickly too. So whether it's the Home Builders Association, BCCA, or your local you know, construction associations or TECA, they're all you know, looking into this, and they've got developing sort of at least a first response to a phone call type of you know, response, so that they can then direct you to what they think might be the best thing too.
Okay, that's great. Here's a question again for anyone. Do you have to be a certified energy advisor to work on Part 9 buildings under the STEP code? Is that only required if the EnerGuide rating is pursued?
So as far as I know, you do not. It doesn't, so in the way that the regulation is written, there's a number of models that can be used, and you don't have to be a registered energy advisor with the ERS, with the HOT 2000. So there are options there.
Great. Another question, it's our understanding that building officials generally rely on professionals like architects or engineers to field review Part 3 buildings. Is the expectation that building officials will undertake this role?
For Part 3?
Yeah.
Well, that goes back to the guide that's being developed by APEG BC and AIBC. And again, my understanding there is there will be layers of assurance tied to that as well. So it'll be similar process for Part 3 buildings as currently, given that there's the guidelines that'll be followed.
Sure. And guys, maybe an opportunity to plug again this special webinar series that's being prepared specifically for building officials.
Yeah, absolutely.
I should have had that in my slides as well. There's 4 webinars that are going to be put in place. They're getting recorded on Thursday, and then they'll be available through the BSSB, the Building Safety Standards Branch website. So we can send you the link to that. And it will go through the details of what you need to know for a building official around dealing with applications that are under the STEP code.
Yeah, I agree, Robin. I think lots of good information that's going to, like detailed information, is going to be in the for building officials and that training series. I think that the costing study, as it comes out, there'll be a lot of good information that people are able to pull out. And I think it's just, you know, having these pieces coming, we're rolling this out as we go forward. And it is a bit of a learning process, right? As we collect more information and understand, you know, what these buildings look like, how to build them in the most cost-effective and effective way possible. You know, this is something we're moving forward for, and key piece, and I was trying to get that across in my presentation, is the need for continued coordination around this, like on an ongoing basis, is going to be critical. You know, we've got a lot of information now. We're getting more out there, and but there will always be a need for additional information as we get a better handle on it.
Great, good stuff. Final question here, because we're wrapping up here. Will it be mandatory training for builders before they can continue to build houses in BC?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Will it be mandatory training for builders before they can continue to build houses in BC?
Well, this is a question for BC Housing, right? I mean, if you're a licensed builder, you are required now to maintain your learning credits, your professional credits. So if you want a license.
Yeah, but from what I understand, it doesn't have, they can't specify what training you take, and so on energy efficiency, although there will be training modules available, that's up to the builders to decide which training modules they decide to take.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well, that there'll be quite a few modules available starting in the coming year.
Okay. Guys, it's 1 o'clock and we're going to have to wrap it up. We apologize for the technical difficulties we had. So some of the PowerPoints were a bit short, or the presentations were a bit shorter than we'd originally hoped. But you will be getting copies of these PowerPoints. They'll be sent out to you with this invitation, along with that webinar link, that 101 link. This will also be recorded. So if you want to share this with colleagues, we'll also be sharing you the link of how you can do that. So it's available on demand. Still getting some messages being sent to me. Oh yeah, please register if you're interested in the best practices guide. Please register. We'll be sending you an invitation on how to go to the GoTo webinar for that one. It's going to be happening same time, same place next week. So look out for those materials. Thank you everyone for participating, and continue to send questions in or dialogue with us through the email that you get sent out. Again, this is a collaborative effort. This is early days in the training. We're happy to share what information we've had now. We'll continue this dialogue going forward. So thanks to everyone for participating, and hopefully we'll see many of you next week. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.